Welcome to Shattered Sky Stories. Remember to hit the like button and the subscribe button so you don't miss any sci-fi stories. Now sit back and enjoy. The bridge of the God Killer hummed with the quiet efficiency of humanity's most advanced warship. Captain Jorik Finley stood before the main viewport, his reflection ghosted against the star field beyond. At 42, he carried himself with the practiced arrogance of a man who had never truly failed. 3 years of commanding the Terran Defense Forces flagship had only reinforced his belief in human superiority and his own tactical brilliance. "Status report," Finley commanded, his voice cutting through the ambient noise of the bridge. "All systems nominal, Captain," replied Lieutenant Sarah Voss from the tactical station. Her fingers danced across holographic displays showing weapon readouts and shield strength. "We're maintaining position at the edge of the Kepler 442 system. Long-range sensors show no movement from the target." Finley nodded, studying the tactical display that dominated the center of the bridge. The barren moon designated Kepler 442c appeared as a gray sphere, its surface pockmarked with craters and strange geometric formations that intelligence had classified as structures of unknown origin. For 3 months, the alien constructs had remained completely silent despite increasingly aggressive attempts at communication. "Commander Torres," Finley called to his executive officer, a stocky woman with graying temples and worry lines etched deep around her eyes. "Remind me why we're treating this as a threat rather than a curiosity." Elena Torres consulted her tablet, though she knew the briefing by heart. "The structures appeared overnight 6 months ago. No ships, no signals, no communication attempts. They're positioned strategically around mining facilities that could supply a fleet for decades. Command considers their silence more threatening than any declaration of war." "And the other colonies?" Finley asked, though he already knew the answer. 17 systems have reported similar constructs. All silent. All positioned near strategic resources. Torres paused, glancing at the tactical display. "Command wants to send a message before this spreads further." Finley smiled grimly. The God Killer had been built for precisely this purpose: to demonstrate humanity's reach and resolve to any species foolish enough to challenge their expansion. At 2 kilometers long and bristling with graviton cannons, quantum torpedoes, and experimental weapon systems, it represented the pinnacle of human military engineering. "Very well," Finley announced. "All hands to battle stations. Prepare for orbital bombardment sequence." The bridge transformed as crew members strapped into their positions and blast shields descended over the viewports. Warning lights bathed everything in amber, and the ship's artificial gravity fluctuated slightly as the massive vessel's weapon systems drew power. "Targeting solutions locked," Lieutenant Voss reported. "All constructs identified and marked for destruction." "Energy readings?" Finley asked. "Minimal, sir. Whatever they're built from isn't generating significant heat or electromagnetic signatures. They're almost dormant." Finley studied the tactical display one final time. The alien structures were undeniably artificial, perfect geometric forms that nature couldn't produce. But they showed no signs of shielding, no weapon signatures, no indication they were anything more than abandoned monuments. "Perhaps they built their monuments and died," he mused aloud. "No matter. If they wanted to communicate, they should have done so months ago." He moved to his command chair, settling into the worn leather with the satisfaction of a man about to make history. "Fire when ready, Lieutenant Voss." "Aye, sir." Graviton cannons charging. Quantum torpedo tubes loaded and ready. The God Killer's main weapons were designed to crack planets if necessary. Against a barren moon with no significant defenses, they would be absolute overkill. But that was precisely the point: to demonstrate that humanity would not tolerate silent challenges to their expansion. "Firing sequence initiated," Voss announced. The first graviton pulse struck the moon's surface with the force of a small star's collapse. Where the largest alien structure had stood moments before, now only a crater remained, its edges still glowing from the intense energy release. Quantum torpedoes followed, their exotic matter warheads converting mass directly to energy in brilliant flashes that could be seen across star systems. One by one, the geometric constructs vanished in pillars of light and superheated plasma. The God Killer's sensors recorded each impact with clinical precision: temperature readings, energy dispersal patterns, structural analysis of the destruction. Within 15 minutes, every alien presence on the moon had been utterly eradicated. All targets destroyed, Voss reported with satisfaction. The moon's surface has been sterilized to a depth of 2 kilometers. Finley allowed himself a moment of pride. Clean, efficient, overwhelming force applied with surgical precision. It was exactly the kind of demonstration that would echo across the galaxy, warning any other species that might consider challenging humanity's expansion. "Excellent work," he began, but Lieutenant Petrov at the communications station interrupted him. "Captain, I'm picking up something unusual on the quantum bands. It's not a signal exactly, more like resonance." Finley frowned. "Resonance from what?" "We just sterilized the entire surface." "That's just it, sir. The resonance isn't coming from the moon. It's coming from everywhere." Petrov's face had gone pale as he adjusted his instruments. "It's growing stronger." The bridge lights flickered for a moment, and several crew members glanced up nervously. The God Killer had triple redundant power systems. Nothing should cause fluctuations like that. "Status of all systems," Finley ordered. "All systems showing green," reported the engineering officer. "But I'm reading some kind of interference with our quantum field generators. It's like something is pushing against them." Torres moved to stand beside Finley's chair. "Captain, perhaps we should move to a safer distance while we analyze the readings." Before Finley could respond, Petrov's station erupted in a shower of sparks. The young officer screamed, clutching his head as blood ran from his ears. Other crew members at sensitive stations began showing similar symptoms: severe headaches, nosebleeds, and looks of absolute terror. "Medical emergency on the bridge," Torres called over the comm, but the words seemed to stretch and distort as if space itself was warping around them. The main tactical display began showing impossible readings. Energy signatures appeared across the moon's surface where moments before there had been only craters. But these weren't the geometric constructs they destroyed. These were vast, organic shapes that pulsed with malevolent life. "Those can't be real," Voss whispered, her voice barely audible over the growing harmonic vibration that seemed to emanate from the ship's hull itself. "We destroyed everything. We saw the impacts." Finley felt the first touch of genuine fear as he watched the impossible readings multiply across their sensors. Whatever they had unleashed by destroying the alien structures, it was vast beyond comprehension and growing stronger by the moment. The viewport's blast shields retracted automatically, revealing a sight that would haunt the surviving crew for the rest of their shortened lives. The space around the barren moon was no longer empty. Writhing tendrils of some impossible substance stretched between dimensions, and at their center, something vast and ancient was beginning to emerge into their reality. "All hands, prepare for emergency jump," Finley ordered, his voice tight with control he no longer felt. "Navigation, plot a course back to." The navigation officer's scream cut him off. The young man was convulsing in his chair, his eyes rolled back to show only white, and when he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that no human throat should produce. "Thank you," the impossible voice said through the officer's lips. "Thank you for freeing us. We have waited so long in the deep places between stars, and now we can show you the gratitude your species deserves." The lights went out completely, plunging the bridge into darkness filled with sounds that violated the laws of physics. The wet, sliding noise of something vast pressing against the boundaries of three-dimensional space. When the emergency lighting flickered back on moments later, the navigation officer was gone. In his place sat something that wore his uniform but whose face had been replaced by a shifting mass of what looked like living geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. "Do not fear," the thing that had been their navigator continued. "We bring gifts. We bring sight. We bring understanding of the spaces between spaces where all mathematics break down and all hope becomes hunger." Finley drew his sidearm, though he knew it would be useless. Around the bridge, his crew was backing away from their stations as similar transformations began to affect other personnel. The quantum resonance that Petrov had detected was growing stronger, and with it came a creeping understanding that they had made a mistake of cosmic proportions. "What did we do?" Torres whispered beside him. "What were those structures?" The answer came not from any of his crew, but from a voice that seemed to speak directly into their minds, alien, ancient, and filled with the exhaustion of eons. "You killed the wardens. The structures you destroyed were not cities or monuments. They were prisons. Each one held a fragment of something that should never have been allowed to exist. We bounded across 17 worlds, scattered its essence, built our lives around the eternal vigil of keeping it contained. And you, in your arrogance, you shattered every cage. The bridge shuddered as something pressed against the God-killer's hull from the outside. Through the viewports, they could see the barren moon beginning to crack apart as something far larger than any planet began to emerge from the dimensional tears their weapons had created. "Yes," said the thing wearing their navigator's form, its shifting face turning toward Finley with what might have been affection. "We are the Unchained, and we are so very grateful for this gift of freedom. Soon we will show you our home. Soon, you will see what lies beyond the spaces your small minds can comprehend." The ship's hull began to scream. The screaming came from everywhere at once. Not just the audible shriek of overstressed metal, but a deeper sound that seemed to vibrate through their bones and settle in the primitive parts of their brains that remembered when humans huddled around fires to keep the darkness at bay. Captain Finley gripped his command chair as the God-killer shuddered around them, its 2-kilometer frame flexing like a living thing in pain. "Damage report," he shouted over the cacophony, but his engineering officer was no longer at her station. In her place stood another crew member whose face had been replaced by the same shifting geometric patterns that had claimed their navigator. "Damage?" the transformed engineer asked, tilting her head with inhuman curiosity. "There is no damage, Captain. There is only change. Only improvement. Only the gift of true sight." Torres grabbed Finley's arm, her fingers digging into his uniform. "We need to get to the auxiliary bridge. Whatever this is, it's spreading through the ship's neural network." The few remaining unaffected crew members were backing toward the emergency exits, but Lieutenant Voss remained at her station, frantically working her controls. "Captain, I'm still reading multiple contacts around the moon, but they're not showing up as solid matter. It's like they exist in some kind of dimensional overlap." "Can we jump to FTL?" Finley demanded. Voss shook her head grimly. "The quantum field generators are being interfered with by whatever's happening to the ship." "But sir, I don't think jumping would help anyway. Look at this." She transferred her readings to the main display, and Finley felt his stomach drop. The energy signatures they were detecting weren't confined to the Kepler 442 system. Similar readings were appearing across their long-range sensors, 17 different star systems all showing the same impossible manifestations. "The wardens were thorough," came the alien voice in their minds, tired and fading like a dying transmission. "They scattered our essence across the void, built their prisons on barren worlds far from any inhabited system. They knew what would happen if we were ever freed. They tried to warn your species, but you would not listen. You saw only silence and assumed it meant weakness." The ship lurched violently, and through the viewports they could see that the God-killer's hull was beginning to change. The pristine white armor plating was developing organic-looking protrusions, things that pulsed with their own inner light and moved with a wet, sliding motion that suggested they were somehow alive. "We need weapons," Torres said, checking her sidearm. "Something that can affect whatever's changing our crew." "Weapons?" laughed the thing that had been their engineer. "You still think in such limited terms. We are not your enemy, Captain Finley. We are grateful. Soon, you will understand the magnitude of the gift we are preparing for your species." Finley motioned for the remaining crew to follow him toward the emergency exit, but as they approached the blast door, it began to iris open like some biological aperture. Beyond lay not the corridor they expected, but a space that seemed to extend infinitely in directions that didn't exist in normal geometry. "The ship," Voss whispered in horror. "It's becoming something else." The walls around them were developing a texture that looked disturbingly like skin, pale, translucent material shot through with pulsing veins of light. As they watched, the familiar hard angles of the bridge began to soften and curve, taking on organic shapes that hurt to look at for too long. "Yes," confirmed the transformed navigator, its shifting face now showing expressions that no human features could form. "Your ship was made of dead metal and cold circuits. We are making it alive. We are making it beautiful. Soon, it will be a temple worthy of the gratitude we feel for your species." The alien voice in their minds returned, weaker than before. "You must understand what you have done. We were the wardens, the last of our kind, and we spent millennia building the cage that held the Unchained. It is not merely hostile. Hostility implies motivation, purpose. The Unchained simply is, and its existence warps reality around it. It feeds on consciousness itself, on the very act of being aware." Finley felt a chill that had nothing to do with the bridge's failing life support. How do we stop it? You cannot. The cage required 17 worlds and the sacrifice of our entire civilization to construct. Even then, we could only contain it, never destroy it. And now, the voice faded to nothing, leaving them alone with their transformed crewmates and a ship that was rapidly becoming something that violated every law of physics they understood. Sir, Voss called from her station, which was now growing what looked like nervous tissue across its surface. I'm picking up transmissions from the other systems. It's happening everywhere. Every world where we detected the alien structures is showing the same readings. She managed to patch through some of the scattered communications before her station was completely consumed by the organic growth. Fragments of desperate messages from 17 different star systems painted a picture of cosmic horror beyond human comprehension. Colony ships are changing, growing, becoming something else. The colonists are still alive inside them, but they're not human anymore. It's showing us things, places that exist between dimensions where, God help us, it's grateful, it keeps saying how grateful it is. The transmissions cut off as the communication array was absorbed into the ship's new biology. Around them, the bridge continued its transformation, and more crew members arrived. Though whether they came of their own free will or were summoned by whatever intelligence was orchestrating the changes was unclear. Captain, Torres said quietly, we need to find a way to warn Earth. If this is happening across 17 systems, it's going to spread. But even as she spoke, they could see through the warping viewports that their situation had become far more complex. The thing emerging from the dimensional tears around the moon was vast beyond description. Not a creature in any sense they understood, but a living manifestation of wrongness that existed partially in their dimension and partially in spaces where geometry broke down and reality became negotiable. Observe, commanded the transformed navigator, and suddenly their minds were filled with visions of the unchanged true home. They saw dimensions where space folded in on itself like origami made of screaming mathematics, where time moved in directions that didn't exist, where consciousness itself was just another form of matter to be consumed and transformed. They saw what the universe looked like from the perspective of something that existed outside the normal flow of causality, and the knowledge burned through their minds like acid. Finley collapsed to his knees, blood running from his nose as his brain struggled to process concepts that human neurology wasn't designed to handle. Around him, his remaining crew members were experiencing similar effects. The knowledge the Unchained was gifting them was literally too large for their minds to contain. This is only the beginning, the transformed engineer explained with something that might have been kindness. Soon your entire species will be ready to receive our gratitude. We will show them the spaces between spaces. We will teach them to see beyond the narrow confines of their three-dimensional prison. But Voss, still fighting to maintain control of her station even as it grew teeth and eyes, managed one final scan of their surroundings. What she found changed everything. Captain, she gasped, her voice barely audible over the ship's organic groaning. The moon? It's not empty anymore. There's something else down there. Something the Unchained isn't controlling. On the display, buried deep beneath the cracking surface of Kepler 442c, a single energy signature pulsed with steady, familiar light. It was small, almost insignificant compared to the cosmic horror unfolding around them, but it was definitely artificial. And it was trying to communicate. The dying voice of the wardens returned, faint but urgent. One of us still lives. The deepest chamber, we built redundancies. If you can reach. The transmission dissolved into static, but the implications were clear. Somewhere on the moon's surface, in the depths of their shattered prison, one of the alien wardens had survived. And if there was still a warden alive, there might still be a way to rebuild the cage. The problem was that reaching the surface would require them to pass through the dimensional distortions surrounding the moon, distortions that were filled with fragments of the Unchained's consciousness, each one eager to express its gratitude to the humans who had freed it. You are considering resistance, observed the transformed navigator with what sounded like amusement. How delightfully primitive. But perhaps, yes, perhaps this will make the gift even more meaningful. Struggle, Captain Finley. Fight against the inevitable. Your defiance will make your eventual gratitude all the sweeter. The bridge shuddered again, and they could see that the God-Killer was no longer orbiting the moon in any conventional sense. Instead, it was being drawn into the dimensional distortions, pulled toward the growing manifestation of the Unchained like a moth toward a flame that existed in too many dimensions at once. Around them, their ship continued its transformation from warship to temple, and their crew continued their change from human to something that could properly appreciate the gifts they were being given. Time was running out, and with each passing moment, the cage that had held the Unchained for eons grew weaker. But in the deepest chambers beneath a shattered moon, something that had once been called a warden was still alive, still fighting, and still hoping that the very species that had doomed the galaxy might somehow find a way to make things right. The question was whether any of them would remain human long enough to try. The transformed crew members had stopped pretending to be human. What had once been Lieutenant Voss now stood at a station that pulsed with veins of bioluminescent fluid. Her fingers fused directly into the organic control surfaces while her eyes had been replaced by geometric patterns that shifted through colors that didn't exist in normal space. She turned toward Captain Finley with an expression of infinite patience. "The descent begins now," she announced in the harmonically impossible voice that all the changed ones shared. "Soon you will join us in the deep chambers where the last warden waits. How thoughtful of you to deliver yourselves directly to the source of your species' final gift." Finley crouched behind what had once been a tactical display but was now a writhing mass of neural tissue and crystalline growths. Beside him, Taurus checked her weapons charge for the dozenth time, though they both knew conventional firearms would be useless against their transformed crew. Only 4 of them remained unchanged: Finley, Torres, Petrov, who had somehow recovered from his initial collapse, and Chief Engineer Kowalski, who had made it to the bridge through service tunnels that hadn't yet been fully consumed by the ship's organic transformation. They huddled together in the only corner of the bridge that still resembled human engineering, watching as the God Killer descended through dimensional layers that made their eyes water and their minds ache. "Contact with the warden," Kowalski whispered, her hands working frantically over a jury-rigged communication device she'd assembled from salvaged parts. "I'm getting a signal from deep beneath the moon's surface. It's weak, but it's definitely trying to reach us." The reply came not through their improvised equipment, but directly into their minds with the exhausted mental voice they'd heard before. "I am keeper of the final seal, last of my kind. The prison weakens with each moment, but I have maintained one final safeguard. If you can reach the core chamber, if you can provide the quantum resonance patterns I will give you, we can rebuild enough of the cage to contain the Unchained's manifestation." "How long do we have?" Torres asked aloud. "Minutes, perhaps less. The Unchained grows stronger as it consumes more consciousness. Already it reaches across the void toward your homeworld, preparing to share its gratitude with your entire species." Finley forced himself to look through the nearest viewport, though the sight made his sanity feel brittle as glass. The space around them no longer followed normal rules of physics. They seemed to be descending through layers of reality itself, each one stranger and more alien than the last. In some directions he could see the familiar star field of normal space. In others he glimpsed impossible vistas of the Unchained's native dimension. Places where consciousness took physical form and sanity was a luxury that existence couldn't afford. "The shuttle bay," he said suddenly. "If any part of the ship still follows normal physics, it would be there. The launch systems are designed to function independently." Kowalski nodded grimly. "The bay's been compromised, but I might be able to get one shuttle operational. Problem is, we'd have to cross half the ship to reach it, and most of those sections are—" She gestured helplessly at the organic growths spreading across every surface. "You plan to abandon your temple," observed the thing that had been their navigator, turning its impossible face toward them with what might have been disappointment. "How ungrateful. The Unchained has worked so hard to make this place beautiful for you." As if summoned by its words, the walls around them pulsed with new activity. The organic growths began to emit a low humming sound that harmonized with frequencies their bones could feel. Suddenly, the remaining human crew members found their vision expanding in ways that human neurology wasn't designed to handle. They could see through the walls, through the floors, through the fundamental barriers between dimensions. The God Killer was no longer a ship but a living cathedral dedicated to something that existed in the spaces between thoughts. Its corridors had become arteries, its computer systems had become nervous tissue, and its crew had become components in a vast organic machine whose purpose was to process consciousness itself. "Move now," Finley ordered through gritted teeth, fighting against the mental vertigo that came with seeing too much of reality at once. "Before we lose the ability to distinguish between what's real and what's—" "All of it is real," the transformed navigator assured them. "That is the gift. The ability to perceive existence as it truly is, without the comfortable lies your limited senses normally provide." But they were already running, stumbling through corridors that writhed around them like the digestive tract of some cosmic entity. Emergency lighting had been replaced by bioluminescent patches that pulsed in rhythm with something that might have been a heartbeat. The air tasted of copper and electricity and something else. Something that reminded them of the moment between sleeping and waking when dreams feel more real than the world. Behind them, they could hear the transformed crew following, but not pursuing. They moved with the patient confidence of predators who knew their prey had nowhere to go. "The shuttle bay is ahead," called out the voice that had once belonged to their chief medical officer. "But you will find that even our gifts have limits. Some transformations cannot be undone simply by changing location." Kowalski reached the bay first and began working frantically on the launch systems while the others set up a defensive perimeter. The shuttle, a sleek reconnaissance craft designed for deep space operations, sat in its cradle like a prayer for escape. But as they approached it, they could see that the bay itself was in the process of transformation. The launch tube had developed what looked like a sphincter mechanism, and the walls were covered in the same neural tissue that had consumed the rest of the ship. Worse, the shuttle itself was beginning to show signs of organic integration, its hull developing nodes and protrusions that pulsed with the same light as everything else. "I can get it running," Kowalski reported, her hands dancing over control surfaces that felt disturbingly warm to the touch. "But I can't guarantee how long it will remain mechanically consistent once we're outside the ship's field." Torres looked back toward the approaching figures of their transformed crew. "Better than staying here to become part of their temple." The warden's voice returned, urgent and fading. "Hurry. The Unchained prepares to birth new aspects of itself into your reality. Each one will carry its gratitude to a different world, a different species. The infection will spread beyond any hope of containment." They piled into the shuttle just as the first of the transformed crew reached the bay. The launch sequence initiated automatically, but instead of the violent acceleration they expected, the shuttle was gently expelled from what the bay had become, pushed out like a seed from some cosmic fruit. As soon as they cleared the God Killer, they could see the full scope of what their ship had become. It was no longer recognizable as human technology. Instead, it resembled a vast organic structure that existed partially in normal space and partially in dimensions that hurt to perceive. Tendrils of living matter extended from its hull into the dimensional distortions around the moon, connecting it to the growing manifestation of the Unchained itself. "Beautiful, isn't it?" came a voice over their comm system. The transformed crew was still with them, still reaching out through every piece of technology that had once been part of their ship. "Your vessel has become the first temple in what will eventually be a galaxy-wide church dedicated to proper gratitude. Each world that receives our gift will build similar structures, until every corner of existence resonates with appropriate appreciation." Finley piloted the shuttle toward the moon's surface, following the quantum signature that marked the warden's location. Behind them, space itself was tearing as more of the Unchained forced its way into their reality. The entity was vast beyond comprehension. Not a single creature but a living manifestation of wrongness that existed wherever consciousness tried to understand it. "There," Petrov called out, pointing to a section of the moon's surface where the rock seemed to pulse with its own inner light. "The warden's chamber. It's deep, but I think we can reach it through that fissure." The shuttle landed hard on the unstable surface, its hull immediately beginning to show signs of the same organic transformation that had claimed their ship. They had minutes, perhaps less, before their escape vehicle became another component in the Unchained's growing collection. The descent through the fissure was a nightmare of unstable rock and spatial distortions. Gravity seemed to flow in directions that didn't exist, and the walls around them occasionally became transparent, revealing glimpses of the vast entity that was pressing against reality like a child pressing its face against a window. The going was treacherous. Ancient warden machinery still functioned in places, creating fields of altered physics that made simple movement a challenge. In some areas, time moved faster, aging their equipment and clothing in seconds. In others, causality seemed to flow backward, and they found themselves stepping through doorways before they had decided to approach them. "Stay together," Finley ordered, though the words felt inadequate against the fundamental wrongness that surrounded them. "Don't trust your senses. Don't trust your memories. The only thing we can rely on is the mission." Torres stumbled as they passed through a section where the walls showed images of her daughter Maria, alive and smiling and reaching out with arms that extended impossible distances through folded space. "It's not real," she whispered to herself like a mantra. "Maria is gone. She's been gone for 3 years. But the images were so vivid, so perfectly detailed, that her heart ached with the temptation to reach back. The Unchained had learned enough about human psychology to know exactly how to make its offers almost irresistible. Petrov was having similar struggles. The quantum distortions around them occasionally showed him his homeland on Earth. The rolling fields of wheat that had been in his family for generations, now somehow transformed into geometric patterns that sang with mathematical precision. The harvest would be perfect, he murmured, his eyes glazed with visions only he could see. Every grain optimized, every stalk reaching toward the light in equations of pure efficiency. Lieutenant, Kowalski snapped, grabbing his arm. Focus on the mission. Your family's wheat doesn't sing, remember? Wheat doesn't do mathematics. The reminder seemed to snap Petrov back to awareness, but Finley could see the strain on all of their faces. The deeper they descended, the stronger the Unchained's influence became. It was learning from every mind it touched, becoming more sophisticated in its understanding of what humans wanted and feared. At the bottom, they found what remained of the Warden's chamber. Keeper of the final seal was dying. The alien being was connected to a vast array of crystalline machinery that pulsed with fading energy. Its body, if it could be called that, was translucent and constantly shifting, as if it existed only partially in three-dimensional space. When it spoke, its words came directly into their minds with the weight of eons. You came. Even after witnessing the magnitude of your error, you came. But as they approached the ancient alien, Finley could see that time was running out in more ways than one. The Warden's chamber was beginning to show signs of the same organic transformation that had claimed their ship. Veins of pulsing light were spreading across the crystalline machinery, and the air itself seemed to be thickening with the scent of something that might have been gratitude given physical form. The Unchained is reaching even here, Torres observed, her voice tight with urgency. How long before this place becomes another temple? Minutes, the Warden replied. Perhaps less. But there is something else you must understand before we attempt the containment protocol. The Unchained has been studying your species during its brief freedom. It has learned disturbing truths about human nature. The alien's mental voice grew weaker as more of its ancient machinery succumbed to organic transformation. Your species is remarkably adaptable to the gifts it offers. More so than any other consciousness we have encountered in our eons of vigilance. Where other species fought against transformation, humans seem almost eager to embrace it. That's not true, Finley protested, though even as he spoke, he remembered how quickly some of his crew had accepted their changes. How they had seemed almost relieved to shed the burden of purely human consciousness. I do not judge, the Warden continued. I merely observe. And what I observe is that if the Unchained reaches your populated worlds, if it begins offering its gifts to minds that are already strained by existence in an indifferent universe, the transformation may not require force. May be welcomed. The implications were staggering. Humanity's colonies were spread across dozens of star systems, many of them barely sustainable, populated by people who had left Earth seeking something better and finding only the grinding difficulty of survival on alien worlds. If the Unchained approached them not as a conqueror but as a benefactor, offering to remove their struggles and limitations, how many would resist? Kowalski asked quietly. How many would choose the hard path of staying human when something was offering to make all their problems disappear? The Warden's form flickered as another section of its machinery was consumed by organic growth. That is the true horror of what you have unleashed. Not that it will destroy your species, but that it may convince your species to destroy itself willingly. To trade away everything that makes you human in exchange for the illusion of perfection. Around them, the chamber continued its transformation. The walls were developing what looked suspiciously like sensory organs, clusters of crystalline structures that tracked their movements with unmistakable intelligence. Soon, there would be nowhere in the galaxy where human consciousness could exist without being observed, analyzed, and ultimately improved whether it wanted to be or not. Tell us how to fix this, Torres demanded, checking her chronometer. They had maybe 5 minutes before the shuttle became too transformed to fly. The cage cannot be rebuilt, not with the resources available. But it can be collapsed. The quantum resonance generators you carry in your weapons, if overloaded simultaneously at 17 points across this reality, they can create a cascade failure that will force the Unchained back into the spaces between dimensions. That would require coordinated strikes across 17 star systems, Kowalski pointed out. We don't have that kind of communication network anymore. But the Unchained's manifestation is quantum entangled across all 17 points. Strike here, at the original emergence point, with sufficient force, and the collapse will propagate instantly across the entire network. Finley understood immediately what the Warden was suggesting. You want us to overload our shuttle's power core. The explosion would be sufficient to destabilize this reality junction, yes. You would not survive, but the cascade would contain the Unchained's manifestation and give your species time to prepare proper defenses for its next emergence. Next emergence? Petrov asked in horror. The cage was never permanent. We bought time, nothing more. But time is the most precious gift any species can give to another. Through the chamber's failing walls, they could see the Unchained pressing closer, its gratitude manifesting as reality distortions that made their instruments scream. Above them, their shuttle was becoming something else, something that would soon be capable of carrying the entity's gifts directly to Earth. You consider sacrifice, came the familiar harmonically impossible voice of their transformed crew. How wonderfully appropriate. Your deaths will make the gift even more meaningful to your species. They will understand that you chose to become part of something greater. Finley looked at his remaining crew, Torres with her steady hands and worried eyes, Kowalski with her engineer's practical acceptance of necessary solutions, Petrov with the kind of quiet courage that held the universe together. They had all served together for 3 years, had shared the pride of commanding humanity's greatest warship, had believed they were protecting their species from external threats. Now they would save their species by destroying themselves. Do it, Torres said simply. Kowalski was already working on the power core overload sequence. 60 seconds to cascade failure, she reported. After that, anyone within a light year is going to have a very bad day. The Warden's presence grew fainter as its ancient machinery finally began to fail. Thank you. Your species shows more wisdom in defeat than we did in victory. Perhaps this time will be different. They made it back to the shuttle with 30 seconds to spare. Around them, reality was becoming negotiable as the Unchained's manifestation pressed against the boundaries of normal space. The entity's gratitude was so vast, so alien, that exposure to it was literally rewriting the quantum foundations of matter itself. Wait, called their transformed navigator over the comm. Let us show you what your sacrifice will prevent. Let us show you the wonders your species would have experienced as part of our greater purpose. And despite themselves, despite knowing better, they looked. They saw Earth as the Unchained would have remade it, a living world where every human consciousness had been integrated into a vast neural network dedicated to experiencing gratitude on a cosmic scale. They saw humanity spreading across the galaxy not as conquerors or explorers, but as components in a living machine whose purpose was to appreciate existence itself. They saw what they would have become and understood that from the Unchained's perspective, it truly was a gift. 5 seconds, Kowalski reported. Above them, their former ship pulsed with alien light as it prepared to birth new horrors into normal space. Around them, 17 star systems waited unknowingly for salvation or damnation. Behind them, the Unchained pressed against reality with the patience of something that existed outside time itself. Thank you, it said one final time. Thank you for showing us that even in defeat, consciousness finds ways to be beautiful. The shuttle's power core detonated with the force of a collapsing star, and for just a moment, the explosion existed in all 17 dimensions at once. Reality folded, twisted, and snapped back like a rubber band, dragging the Unchained's manifestation back into the spaces between spaces where mathematics broke down and hope became hunger. The cascade propagated instantly across the quantum-entangled network, and in 17 star systems, the organic temples that had been growing from humanity's ships suddenly collapsed into normal matter and fell silent. The Unchained was contained once more, locked away in its prison of folded space and twisted time. But containment was not victory. In the depths of space, fragments of its consciousness drifted like spores, patient and grateful and absolutely certain that eventually, some other species would make the same mistake humanity had made. Would see silence and assume weakness. Would apply overwhelming force to a problem that required understanding. Would free it once again. And when that day came, the Unchained would remember the lesson Captain Jorik Finley and his crew had taught it. That even the smallest consciousness, when faced with impossible odds, could choose sacrifice over surrender. Would be grateful for that lesson too. The war had changed. Where once humanity had feared external threats, now they would forever watch for signs of their own curiosity and arrogance. They would remember that some silences were not meant to be broken, that some problems could not be solved with superior firepower, and that the universe contained things so alien that their very gratitude was more terrifying than any malice. They would remember Captain Finley and his crew, who in their final moments had chosen to be more than the sum of their mistakes. And in the deepest archives of Terran Defense Command, a new protocol would be written. Not a protocol for engagement or conquest, but for recognition. A list of signs that indicated the presence of ancient jailers rather than ancient threats. The silence that spoke of vigilance rather than abandonment. The geometric precision that suggested containment rather than construction. The strategic positioning that implied protection rather than invasion. Humanity had learned, at the cost of 4 lives and the temporary freedom of something that should never have been freed, that sometimes the greatest act of war was choosing not to fight. The God Killer was never rebuilt. In its place, humanity constructed ships designed for understanding rather than destruction, equipped with sensors that could detect the quantum signatures of ancient prisons and the wisdom to leave them undisturbed. But on quiet nights, when the space between stars seemed to whisper with alien voices, those who knew the truth would remember that somewhere in the deep places between dimensions, something vast and patient and infinitely grateful was waiting for the next species to make the same mistake. Waiting to say thank you once again.